Davis 4-3 in the win. Oh, it's good!
Crosby in on goal, backhander, he scores!
And good! 49ers win it!
Hello everyone, welcome to this video. Today we'll be going over the biggest winners and losers of NFL free agency and all the moves kind of associated with it. So I'll be talking about some trades, cuts, all that kind of stuff. So without further ado, let's kind of get into this. So I have three kind of tiers. Winners obviously means I'd say this team got definitively better over free agency and this period. Not available means they're basically almost going to be the same team before the draft, of course. And then losers means that this team has lost players or they just did not get the value they thought they would in contracts and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, this does not mean that your team sucks automatically or that they're not going to be good next year. It just means that before the draft, at least, that right now they might be doing really good with signing players or they might not be doing so good. But at least this will not be the full offseason kind of rankings because we still have the draft and that's going to be really big for a lot of these teams that might not have signed that much for agents. So without further ado, let's get into kind of ranking these teams. I had a hard time kind of picking out the Raiders, I'm not going to lie. So I'm going to put them in kind of like the not available tier just because Jimmy G, Derek Carr, they're very similar quarterbacks. And then they signed a couple of tight ends. They signed O.J. Howard and they signed Austin Hooper, I believe, earlier today. And then, of course, they lost Darren Waller for just about nothing. So that's kind of, I'd still rather have Darren Waller than those two guys. And then other than that, they really just kind of were a very similar team. They did sign Jacoby Marzo. I did like that signing. It's a pretty valuable signing. So because they lost a good player, they kind of got a little bit of return to those tight ends. They signed a very similar quarterback, and they also signed a very similar wide receiver. I can't really say they moved the needle too much up or too much downward, so I'll just kind of put them in not available. Broncos, they're pretty good winners right now. Not that much people are kind of talking about it just because obviously there are a lot more storylines with the Sean Payne stuff. Obviously they got Sean Payne, which is a good pickup, but they got Ben Powers, Mike McGlinchey, and they also got Samaje Perine. I think that's going to help their running game a little bit more just because he is a really good pass catcher, especially kind of like over the middle, and that can help Russell Wilson a lot, especially because we know he's not the biggest quarterback in the world. Then I like the Ben Powers signing that helps beef up the offensive line. Then, of course, Mike McGlinchey, I've stated kind of my problems with him before, especially as a 49er fan. They did come rear its ugly heads from time to time, but at the same time, it's still an upgrade over whoever their old right tackle was. So because they upgraded their offensive line and they helped get Russell Wilson a little bit more help, especially in the trenches, I'd say they're pretty good winners. Chiefs are losers, but I don't think they're going to regress too much, if at all. The only thing is they lost Orlando Brown. They signed Jawan Taylor, which I'm not really a big fan of that, and then they lost Andrew Wiley as well. So they lost a couple pieces on their offensive line. Then they lost McCole Hardman. I understand he was injured for a good part of the year, but still losing more pieces. But at the same time, we've seen this team lose Tyreek Hill and they won the Super Bowl. So I'm not going to be overly critical, but at the same time, their roster did definitively get worse. Chargers, I'm going to put them in the losers just because they really didn't sign anybody because they had like no money to, and then Austin Eckler had the trade request. So at the same time, if they do fix that, I think they'd be more of like in the not available tier, but because they're probably might lose, they're in jeopardy of at least losing their best running back. Yeah, that's going to be a big blow for them, and they didn't really do anything because, as I mentioned before, they spent a lot of money on free agency earlier, so especially the last couple of years, so they really didn't have that kind of money to go around this time. Talking about the other LA team, I'd have to put them as losers as well. They lost Brandon Powell, who are the pretty nice receivers, especially down the stretch. They didn't re-sign Baker Mayfield, which I thought was kind of a bad move just because Baker Mayfield sitting behind Matthew Stafford could have been really interesting. Then, of course, you lost Jalen Ramsey, and obviously, I might be a little bit biased because I don't like the Rams at all, but still, they lost a lot of pieces, which I thought they would have brought back. So I didn't really see like Aaron Donald, Cooper Kupp, or Stafford kind of going anywhere. So you would think they would have wanted to bring back those pieces, but who really knows with that? They might just wait until they can sign free agents and drafts in another period where they actually have their picks. So because of that, they're losers. And speaking of which, my team is up next, and these rankings don't really matter, by the way, but we're not doing super hot right now just because we lost a lot of players. We lost Aziz Al-Shayar, we lost Mike McGlinchey, we lost Robbie Gould, we lost Jimmy Ward, and those are just kind of like the top of the names on top of my head right now, and that's a lot of pieces. We're losing for really nothing. We got Javon Hargrave, and if it wasn't for that, I think the fan base would be in a much worse mood. But because we got one really good free agent, they're not talking about it too much. But other than the Hargrave signing, I like the Isaiah Oliver signing, but we lost just so many other pieces throughout our roster, and we also lost Emmanuel Mosley as well. We thought we could have got him back. He signed for cheap with Detroit, but we didn't bring him. And then we kind of had another whiff with CJ Garner-Johnson. I'll probably talk more about that in another video, but we had a couple opportunities to sign better guys and to retain guys. We just didn't. We still don't have a kicker, so we're not doing super good in free agency right now. So I'm going to have to put us in the loser tier. Seattle, they got Julian Love and they got Devin Bush. Not too crazy signings, but at the same time, that helps their defense a lot. And then they've been really good at the draft a lot, especially last year. So I can imagine them getting even better throughout the draft. But free agency, overall, that was a net positive for them. They got Geno Smith on an extension. Hopefully, it wasn't a contract year kind of deal. And they could be pretty good, honestly. They're not too far away. Cardinals, oh boy. I'm not sure just because really what I always kind of have to put them in the loser tier of everyone else because they did not get better at all. I think they re-signed a couple people, but other than that, I think Kaiser White, they did not do anything really. And but I understand at the same time they're in a bind just because we know for a fact Kyler Murray is going to be out for at least half the season or so because the ACL injury. So that blows entirely. And then there's a new coaching staff, there's a new GM in town. So a lot of kind of turnover. So I understand they were not in a position to sign free agents. So that's why I'll kind of have to put them in the losers tier. But it's really, I don't think it's too bad just because I think going into the season, most Cardinals fans already have to understand that their quarterback's not going to be playing for the majority of the season. So it's going to be a lost cause unless they really are able to stay afloat for those Kyler-less games. Texans, yeah, they signed some pretty nice guys. They got Robert Woods, and then they got Devin Singletary, and they locked Laramie Tunsil up for an extension as well. I know they signed a couple more guys as well. Don Schultz, that's a nice pickup. They obviously got Jimmy Ward also, and they got D'Amico Ryans, who's going to be a really good coach for them. So I'd put them in a winner so far, and then they're probably going to draft Bryce Young or whoever goes to second overall of CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, etc. And I think with all they didn't get like the best weapons in the world, but they're very serviceable and a lot of veteran presence, which they brought in, which I really like, just because obviously it's going to help kind of guide the rebuild a little bit and give some veterans for D'Amico Ryans to use on the field. And I kind of like their offseason. Obviously they had so many holes, they had so kind of little talent on their roster. Just signing all these guys just makes their team already so much better. And their draft is probably going to be, I can imagine it being pretty decent. So overall, they're winners so far. Ooh, Titans. I thought about it. I wasn't sure at first, but I kind of changed my mind. They're winners. They got Arden Key, who was a former 49er. He played for the Jags last year. They also got Aziz Al-Shayar, who I really like. And then they signed, I believe, Daniel Brunskill from the 49ers as well. They're kind of bringing in a lot of former 49er players, which makes sense because their new GM, Ron Carthon, was a former 49er kind of assistant GM. And I think those signings make a lot of sense. They're nothing crazy. Obviously, I know they're kind of in the cap space stretches because Ryan Tannehill took up a lot of money. We'll really have to see what they want to do with Malik Willis, Ryan Tannehill, that whole kind of deal of whatnot. But I can say at least their team got better. Jags, I thought about this. I thought they were a loser for sure, but I kind of realized I'm going to just put them in the not available tier, honestly. And my main thing with the Jags is just going to be that they had to cut Shaquille Griffin for money. They brought in Andrew Wingard, and then they brought in Dearness Johnson, and just nothing. They didn't do too much, so it's just their needle did not move at all, really. So that's why I can't really say they're a complete loser, but they're not. They obviously didn't win anything either, so I'll kind of put them in the not available tier. Ooh, the Colts. I think they had a pretty decent free agency, all things considered. They had to cut Matt Ryan, obviously, but they got in Gardner Minshew, who can start a couple games for them, honestly, depending on who they draft for their quarterback, if that's Will Levis or whoever. They also signed Samson Ebukam, if I remember correctly, who, once again, a lot of former 49ers moved places, unfortunately. And that was a really good pickup for them. I like that pickup. It helps with their defensive line, especially if Yannick Ngakoue, we're not really sure where he's going with that, whatever. And then they got the Eagles offensive coordinator as their new head coach. I think a lot of it really depends on who they draft as a quarterback. If they have Will Levis, they let him sit behind Gardner Minshew, and then they get a couple more weapons, even more so down the line. I think they can be a pretty decent team. They also brought back Ashton Doolin as well. Forgot to mention that. So so far they're doing pretty decent. Saints, I'm gonna put them in the winners tier just because they brought Derek Carr in, who I do still think is better than Andy Dalton, and then they still have Jameis Winston who's gonna sit behind them. They have healthy Michael Thomas, and they extended him. That can be really nice for them. And then they also got in a couple other pieces. Jamal Williams, that's a big piece for them. I think just because we kind of don't know what's going on with Alvin Kamara's situation, I can imagine that being like a 1-2 punch. Alvin Kamara's a really good receiving back, and then at the goal line, I'm pretty sure Jamal Williams is going to be getting like 99% of those touches. So I can see this roster did get a little bit better, all things considered. But I know they lost a lot of piece on their defense, but at the same time, they have been really good at finding kind of and developing some pieces, especially to the draft. So I think having a better QB overall, I think that's going to help them big time. Bucks, I'm gonna put them in the losers tier just because the only real big change I can say off the top of my head would just be, I know they lost a couple pieces on their secondary, Mike Edwards for sure, but at the same time, they went from Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield on a prove-it deal. And obviously, I understand on a prove-it deal that they really are not risking much, but still, they really, other than that, they did not get any major free agents. They kind of re-signed a lot of guys because they still really want to compete, but I'm not sure how well that's going to be. And because of that, they didn't really move the needle on every other part of the roster, and they got a worse quarterback overall, in my opinion. So, obviously, I think Baker Mayfield still has potential, but we really just don't know if that was Sean McVay helping him, and obviously, he's not going to have nowhere near the same help in Tampa Bay coaching-wise. So I kind of put them in the losers tier. Panthers, I'm really liking their free agency so far. They brought in Adam Thielen, who obviously is a little bit older, but that's a good veteran presence. They brought in Hayden Hurst, which I like, Miles Sanders. And they also brought in, of course, Frank Reich, who's going to be a great help to whatever quarterback they bring in. And they traded all the way up to the number 1 spot for a reason. I did think they gave up a lot. I think the main thing with that trade would just be they gave up DJ Moore. But this is one of those trades we really won't know how good it was for the Bears or the Panthers until, obviously, years past where we know who they draft, who the Bears get, et cetera, how that works with DJ Moore over there. Just because if the Panthers get like Anthony Richardson or CJ Stroud and they develop to be superstars and they win a lot of playoff games together, obviously that was a very good use to trade up to get a franchise quarterback. But if their quarterback doesn't pan out, it's really gonna be a bad look for them. So that's why. But for now, I'd still say they're winners. Falcons, another team where they signed a bit of talent. They signed Lorenzo Carter, who was a linebacker. They signed also Jesse Bates III, which they did pay him a lot of money, but that's going to help their secondary a lot. And other than that, I don't think they lost too much pieces. The only real thing is going to be, do they draft a new quarterback? I know they signed Taylor Heineke, so it's going to be between him and Desmond Ridder. If they get another quarterback, what's going to happen there? But other than that, I did like the moves they did make in the offseason. I think they're better than most people would give them credit for. They kind of had a lot of close games once again. The only thing with the Falcons is going to be, will they all kind of actually get together, because they also got Jonas Smith as well. But at the same time, it just seems that they do have talent, but it just never meshes on the field. Steelers, this was a team where I was kind of not available for a while, just because I wasn't really too sure, but I realized they did lose Devin Bush, which a lot of people were complaining about. I'm not sure how good Miles Jack was in Pittsburgh, because he was only there for a year or so. But then they got Patrick Peterson, they got Holcomb on a pretty really affordable deal as well, and they still have obviously still have Mike Tomlinson. Because of that, I'd say they're pretty slight winners. Nothing crazy overall, but I did like bringing Patrick Peterson, kind of showing up that secondary, especially if Fall Cameron Sutton in there. But they still have pieces overall, and I think if they have another year to develop, a lot of the pieces they drafted last year will really come through. And if they have another good draft, that's going to be even better. So they're winners, but they're just kind of slight winners. Ravens, I'd say they're losing just because there's all the Lamar Jackson kind of situation. Just because obviously they put the non-exclusive tag on him, no team's biting, and then Lamar Jackson doesn't want to be there. And if they lose Lamar Jackson, that's a 100% loss in free agency, no questions asked about that. And they really didn't sign anybody else. They cut Calais Campbell, and yeah, they didn't do much at all. So and then right now there's a whole Lamar situation. So they're losing kind of big in free agency right now. I'm not gonna lie. Browns, they had a pretty decent offseason, all things considered, at least so far. They brought in Ogbonni Okonkwo. I like that pickup a lot. Dalvin Tomlinson, two kind of under the radar signings, so not big names, but I think that's going to help out their defense a lot. I believe they picked up a cornerback recently, so that's just going to help really shore up their defense, which the last year they're really average on defense, all things considered. The only thing is we all know that the main thing with the Browns is we're kind of waiting on Deshaun Watson they're waiting on Deshaun Watson to be more specific, to come back, and they're hoping that they traded all those assets during all his kind of controversies for a reason. And if that doesn't pan out, it's going to be a pretty bad look for the Browns. But I like all their defensive signings. I thought those were really nice so far. Bengals, I'd say they're winners as well, just because they lost Jesse Bates, but they know they drafted, I believe it was Louis Sene off the draft last year to replace him basically. But they got Orlando Brown, which is going to be huge for the offensive line, just because last year they signed a bunch of guys for the offensive line, but they struggled, and then when they were really finding their stride together, they obviously got hurt. That's a kind of a big deal to get a piece like Orlando Brown on that offensive line. And they also brought back a couple free agents as well. So I'd say overall they won, just another kind of slight winner, but I think Orlando Brown's going to really help shore the offensive line. Chicago's a team I can really say they won like free agency. They brought in TJ Edwards, they brought in Tremaine Edmonds, they brought in I'm blanking, I believe Nick Gates not Nick Gates, but they brought in an offensive lineman from Tennessee, which I thought was a really good guard signing as well. And then of course they got DJ Moore, they got a haul for the trading down in the draft. So overall they're really doing good in free agency right now. Free agency, trading, all things considered. That DJ Moore trade is going to help Justin Fields a lot, especially with how a lot of quarterbacks have like a year 3 jump. So I'm really excited to see how this kind of meshes with their system and all that. So right now, Chicago, they're like a big winner for sure. Lions, another big winner. They got Emmanuel Mosley and CJ Gardner-Johnson for like pennies on the dollar, like $6 and $8 million contracts respectively. And I know those two players are much better than $6 and $8 million, especially if they're fully healthy. They brought in David Montgomery, who I'd say is a little bit more reliable than Jamal Williams. I love Jamal Williams. I think he's a very fun guy, but at the same time, he's really reliant on kind of like those goal line touches. While I think David Montgomery has a little bit more upside, especially receiving. So that's an other signing I really enjoyed. And then they have the Rams pick as well. And just because the fact they got those two defensive back contracts for so cheap, they brought in David Montgomery, which replaced Jamal Williams almost pretty fast, really. And they got Montgomery on another really affordable deal. So I have to say, Lions, pretty big winners. Packers, I'm going to put the Packers and the Jets in the same, just back-to-back, just because we all know we're really waiting on once Rodgers gets there, just because we know Aaron Rodgers wants to play there, and the Packers and the Jets are trying to hammer out a deal. The only thing is, I'm missing a lot of stuff about the contract schematics, because the Packers want at least a first and a couple other picks for Aaron Rodgers. The Jets do not want to bite on that in the slightest, so we'll really have to see how that kind of goes for them. All I know is that if the Jets do land Aaron Rodgers, once they do, I'd say as long as they don't like throw in like 4 first-rounders or something absurd, they're pretty big winners. And the only thing is, the Packers did lose a lot of talent, but at the same time, they know it's going to be a rebuilding year, and if they get a bunch of picks for Aaron Rodgers, I'd say they at least got off Aaron Rodgers. They're going to be moving on, which I think they should have done last year, but still, I think they can both be winners. Just right now, they're really dependent on if they get Rodgers or not, just because the Jets, they lost Mike White, they brought in Alan Lazard, they brought in a couple other former Packers, because they're really trying to get that Rodgers deal done, and they obviously convinced them to go over. They're just waiting on the Packers to kind of fully complete it through. So I think the Jets can be really big winners, but as I mentioned before, they're still just waiting on that Rodgers news. And once that happens, I can probably move them up or down, especially if I want to do another one of these videos post-draft on how much teams got better. Ooh, Vikings, they're quiet winners. I'm not going to lie. As much as people make it seem like I hate the Vikings, I'd say they got Byron Murphy, who was a really nice under-the-radar pickup, especially for their kind of a really weak cornerback room. Obviously, I know they lost I believe they waived Cameron Dantzler, which I thought was kind of a weird move, but and they also lost Patrick Peterson. But I think Byron Murphy is still really young and he's really talented. He played with the Cardinals, which obviously last year that was not the best place to get a lot of eyes on. So they did that, and then they obviously brought in Brian Flores, who's going to help their defense a lot. And they brought in Marcus Davenport, who I think Brian Flores can really help coach up as well. And then of course they brought in. He was Brandon Powell from the Rams, so I think can really help kind of solidify their wide receiver 3 positions, because a lot of the time, especially in the playoffs, it really was just Justin Jefferson, and once he was out of games, it can be kind of tough, especially with KJ Osborne. He can be a really good player sometimes, but he can also be really inconsistent. But I'd say overall, I think the Vikings didn't do any flashy moves, but they for sure got just a little bit better for sure. Giants, I'd say they're winners. They got Darren Waller for like nothing, which I still can't believe they only got him for like a really late 3rd round pick. That's a really good value trade for the Giants especially. And then obviously the Daniel Jones contract, as I mentioned before and in the previous video, it might seem like really bad, but it's pretty there's not too much guarantees. After the 2nd year, they can cut them, I believe after their 3rd year or so. So there's a lot of kind of shenanigans they can pull for that contract if it doesn't go well. But obviously, once under only 1 year in Brian Dable, I think Daniel Jones for sure got better with all the other kind of stuff that was going on, especially when they had guys like the former Dallas coach. I'm blanking on the name right now, but there was such a crap show going on with the Giants for a while, especially if I feel like they were firing offensive coordinators every year. So having someone like Brian Dable, who's a lot more stable, is gonna really help out their team. And I just like what they also signed a Bobby Okwukiri, really good linebacker from Indianapolis. So I'm really, because they really needed linebacker help, and no one's kind of talking about that. So I also tagged Saquon Barkley, who if they get him on a pretty affordable deal, that can be a really nice move, especially if he continues to stay healthy. And they also brought back Darius Slay, another really team-friendly deal as well. So I'd say they did pretty good for agency. Dallas is a pretty big winner. They brought Stephon Gilmore, who obviously is not the same player he used to be, but only for a 5th-round pick. It's a really good deal. Helps out their secondary a big time, especially he's going to be playing next to Diggs. So him as like a CB2 is going to be really interesting to see. They brought Brandon Cooks in for a pretty affordable deal. All things considered. He didn't want to be on the Texans anymore, and it seemed like his time was up. So having Brandon Cooks, especially as like a number 2 to CeeDee Lamb, really, really nice pickup for them. And they signed just about all their free agents. So just because those Gilmore and the Cooks moves I thought were really nice, I'd say they're a pretty decent winners so far. And they also cut Zeke, which at this point was a given, and they really need to get off his contract. So another really good move for them. Eagles, I'm not gonna lie, they lost a bunch of talent. They lost Kaiser White, TJ Edwards, Javon Hargraves, CJ Garner-Johnson as well. So that's a bunch of guys just on their I believe they lost one of their wide receivers as well. And then that's a bunch of guys, as I mentioned before, like a couple seconds ago, they lost a bunch of guys on their defense. Obviously, I still think they're going to be a really good team because Jalen Hurts is a really good quarterback. He still has A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. But we have to acknowledge they lost a bunch of talent on their defense, and that was a big part of it. They brought back Jason Kelsey as well, but they lost so much players on the defense, especially like the C.J. Garner-Johnson one. Like, it was only for $8 million. I don't know if they just didn't offer him that or he just didn't want to be there. So they also lost Miles Sanders, but at the same time, that is a loss. But it seemed like Miles Sanders was kind of the role he was getting and the kind of running scheme they used just was not going to fit him. So I understand why that was still the way that happened, but they just lost a lot of guys on their defense overall. So I'd say they are for sure losing kind of so far in this offseason. The Commanders had a really quiet kind of offseason, and if they do lose Dan Snyder, that's like that there would be another tier just for the Washington Commanders on how big of a win that would be. But at the same time, they signed Nick Gates, they signed Andrew Wiley for their offensive line. The only thing was going to be who's going to be their quarterback. They have Jacoby Brissett, who can start off a couple games for them. But other than that, they didn't really lose anybody. So they lost Cole Holcomb, I believe. But other than that, I'd say they're slight winners. Just because bringing a bunch of guys to help the offensive line and whatever rookie Jacoby Brissett can start off a couple games in a pinch as well. That's going to be really nice for them. Patriots, slight winners just because a lot of teams are only slight winners because they made a couple moves, nothing too crazy, no like overpays or anything crazy like that. They signed Mike Gesicki, who I think was just not being utilized in Miami anymore. I'm not sure what the case was. I'm not sure if it was like kind of like a scheme thing or whatever. But I think if Bill Belichick can, we know he loves to use two tight ends. They traded away Johnny Smith, so it makes sense. They got Mike Gesicki. And then they also got James Robinson, who was a really nice pickup. I think he only got like a couple million for like a 1-year deal, and he has a lot of receiving potential. I know they lost Damian Harris, so it kind of makes sense that they signed someone with kind of like a similar skill set. And they got Juju Smith-Schuster, who I consider a little bit of an upgrade over Jacoby Myers. Pretty lateral overall, but still, I like their running back and I like their tight end signings a lot. And then they traded Johnny Smith for only a 7th-round pick, but still better get something rather than just cutting him for nothing. So that's another thing you have to consider. And we all know the Patriots are a really draft-heavy team. Bills, I'd say they're slight winners because I think Damian Harris is a little bit better than Devin Singletary. And they got Connor McGovern, who is going to be a pretty nice upgrade at center. And then I believe they made a couple other signings. The only thing is they did lose Tremaine Edmonds, which at the top of my head, that's kind of like a little bit of a loss for them. But at the same time, they still have Matt Milano. I would imagine they also probably have another pretty good draft as well. They did waive Isaiah McKenzie, but as I mentioned before, I'm pretty sure they probably have something in the draft. But because of that, I want to say they're winners, but they kind of almost swapped running backs, really. And then at the same time, they got an upgrade at offensive line, but they lost a little bit at linebacker. So I'd say they're really just like almost the same team, all things considered. I think like the net negative, the net positives, all those kind of signings and not signing backs kind of just cancel out. So I'll kind of put them in the same, like in the NA tier. I'd say the Dolphins didn't do too much, but they did. They got Jake Bailey, I believe, from the New England Patriots, who got waived by them. But the main thing with the Dolphins, they got Jalen Ramsey, who was a really nice pickup, and they only gave up like a third and one of like their tight end 3. So that's a really nice pickup for them. They didn't do too much, but getting a Jalen Ramsey, who's a like a legit, even though he had a down year last year, I think he could still be really good with the Dolphins. So, and then you got Vic Fangio, who's gonna help really kind of coach up that defense. So you'll have some nice playmakers on the defensive side of the ball. Bradley Chubb, Jalen Ramsey, and then Xavier Howard. That can be really interesting to see, especially under Vic Fangio. But all right, guys. So this is kind of what the finals rankings are looking like right now. If you guys have any comments, if you want to disagree with me, if you think one team should be lower, one team should be higher, if you thought I forgot something, like a signing I mentioned or a cut I didn't mention, leave that down below. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later.